Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched The Gentleman. Let's talk about it. So The Gentleman is directed by Guy Ritchie, who also directed Snatch, the Sherlock films, The Man from U.N.C.L.E., King Arthur, Legend of the Sword, Aladdin. There are a ton of films here that I think people have, to be generous, mixed opinions on. But here's the thing, I don't care because I'm a huge Guy Ritchie fan. Legit, I love his films for the most part. I even had a fun time with King Arthur, Legend of the Sword. I thought it was so much better than critics made it out to be. And I happen to think that Man from U.N.C.L.E. is one of the most underrated films of the decade. I really enjoy the types of films that Guy Ritchie makes. I just think that they're so distinctly his, and they have his vision and his Guy Ritchie isms in them. And the same can most definitely be said for The Gentleman. And I actually think, even though I'm already quite generous with this guy's films, I actually think that this is one of his very best, if not the very best Guy Ritchie film that I've seen. So let's get into it. I'm going to be splitting this review as per usual from the good and the bad. There's going to be no spoilers. Hopefully I'm able to keep this completely spoiler free because I really want you guys to experience this film fresh with no background information whatsoever. I actually think that the marketing campaign for this film is pretty piss poor. I don't think it does it justice. And speaking of being piss poor, this film is an R-rated, is it NC-17 rated film? I don't know about in the US, but in the UK it was rated 18, and I don't know if I've ever been to a film that's rated 18 in the UK, so keep that in mind if you're watching this review and you're underage. Without further ado, let's get into this. So firstly, I found this film to be such a refreshing and modern take on the gangster film that included all of my favourite Guy Ritchie-isms that I very much enjoy in his films. As I said before, you have the fantastic character dynamics, especially between male characters. I think that's where Guy Ritchie really excels, is writing and portraying these tough guy, British Cockney characters. And the actors who portrayed these characters gave great performances, in particular Hugh Grant, Colin Farrell and Charlie Hunnam. Whilst Charlie Hunnam is the one who's often compared to Tom Hardy for obvious reasons, it's actually Hugh Grant who takes on a very Tom Hardy persona in this film with his cheekiness and his Cockneyisms, whilst at the same time maintaining this undercurrent of sinisterness and like someone that you really should take seriously because they could perhaps do a lot of damage, at least for the first half of the film. For the second half, things change, the power dynamics shift, but for the most part Hugh Grant portrays this excellent, intelligent, witty character who's really cheeky and charismatic and so funny. He is so funny in this film, whilst at the same time maintaining a level of power and dominance in a film that's all about that. Now, speaking of Charlie Hunnam, he's also great here. He gives a much more understated performance that's much more pensive and quietly intelligent. He's just soaking in the atmosphere and taking in the information that's given to him. But there are moments where that breaks and you get that explosion of violence from him, and you're just waiting to see what's going to make him tick throughout the whole film. Again, I don't want to reveal too much, but it really is just such an exercise in restraint when it comes to this character, and I think he works very well, especially alongside Hugh Grant's character, who is cheekier and funnier and more, the loudest person in the room. Charlie Hunnam is kind of just taking it all in and observing him, and this enhances the comedy aspect as well because he acts as the straight man in their interactions. Speaking of comedy, this film is so funny. I honestly think that this is one of the funniest films that Guy Ritchie has come out with. He always has comedic elements in his films that make them more lovable to me, but this just takes the cake. For the most part, this is just non-stop comedy, and I love it. I love it, especially because of the genre that this film deals with. The gangsters and the powerful people, the criminals, the intimidating people just end up having these comedic moments that are just great. They're so off-kilter, and the entire film itself has that weird structure to it that embraces so many of those, again, Guy Ritchie-isms that I love. In this case, I'm talking about the story conventions that he uses throughout most of his films, the storytelling conventions. And here, those storytelling conventions really lend themselves to the story of the actual film, as well as enhancing the comedy. And this brings me to something that I don't usually highlight on my channel because I'm not an expert in this field by any means, but it's something that is so blatantly excellent when it comes to this film, and that is the editing. The editing here is on point. Editing is so important in film just in general, but especially when it comes to comedy, especially when you're trying to sell the delivery of a line, editing is key. It can make or break a joke, and here you just have some flawless genius, in my opinion, editing on behalf of whoever edited this video, but also Guy Ritchie piecing together this story and making it so much more fun, so much more dynamic, and just ingenious. Truly, like, it's just different. It's a completely different structure of a gangster film. I very much appreciated having this breath of fresh air within this crowded and oversaturated and been there, done that genre. Now, going back to the performances for a second, I already highlighted how brilliant I thought some of the British actors were in this film, but actually there are a couple of Americans here too. I thought Matthew McConaughey was great here. He was much more subdued, and he was very good at depicting this character who has reached the peak of his career. He's reached the peak of his success, and he's ready to kind of settle down and actually enjoy the fruits of his labors. And so you have this, basically the king of the concrete jungle, who's ready to kind of settle in his wealth and in his success, but at the same time there's always that bubbling sense of violence that's just beneath the surface, that's lurking within him, and it acts as a very effective way of presenting him as a valid threat to any opposition that he may face. I also very much enjoyed Jeremy Strong in this film. What a delightful addition to the cast. I love him in Succession. I think he's great, and I was so happy to see him here too. I think his character is weird, like, it's very bizarre, and I think it took the audience, in my screening at least, a little while to kind of warm up to him and to realize that he's not to be taken too seriously, because I think at first people were like, what's going on here? Like, he's very American in a very British film, which we'll get to in a second, but I think over time people realized the kind of quirkiness of his character and actually found it really funny, so the laughs kind of improved or increased as the film went on with him in it. But I very much enjoyed his character from the get-go. I think he's great, and I think he's a great addition, a quirky addition to this very macho, very cockney cast. Aside from the comedy and the characters, like I said, the biggest thing for me about this film is its invigoration of gangster movies. It shakes them up, it does something new with them, it does something very Guy Ritchie with them, and I love that because I'm sick and tired of gangster movies. I know The Irishman is a highly acclaimed film, but I personally didn't enjoy it that much because it's just more of the same. I'm sick of it. It's never been my favorite genre or subgenre of film. But then this film comes along and presents itself as a gangster movie, but with different elements, more exciting and modern and up-to-date elements that just, again, breathe a breath of fresh air within this tired and dreary genre at this point. I think this film does for gangster movies what Kingsman: The Secret Service did for spy films. And considering Kingsman is one of my favorite films of the decade, that's something that's definitely interesting to me. And similarly to Kingsman, there is of course that element of Britishness within Guy Ritchie films. I love the fact that it's a modern take on a British gangster movie. There's no hello governor, like none of that. We're dealing with an authentic Britishness, and we're dealing with different settings within the UK and different cultures within the UK, from the huge decrepit mansions of the aristocracy to the tiny decrepit council estates of central London. Like, I love the diversity of British culture that is on display here, even within this very specific subgenre of film. Now, this is of course a gangster movie, but unlike Kingsman, where there are a lot of cool action sequences, here it's pretty light on action, I have to say. I wouldn't expect too much violence and too many action beats here. There are a few, and I think they are very, very effective, and again, very different to what we usually see, like the regular old punch-up when it comes to a gangster movie, but there aren't too many. And in fact, the film actually has a meta commentary on the lack of significant violence within it. But I think the action that is here works really well and really effectively in order to establish the power dynamics at work here. So I really, really enjoyed this film. I had a fantastic time with it. I think it was great for the most part. I only have a few criticisms. The first one would be Henry Golding's character. I think he's really good here, but there isn't enough of him. And considering the marketing and the advertising for this film, I thought he'd have more of a prominent role and be more of a prominent character here. But he actually doesn't have a ton of screen time, which is slightly disappointing. I'm warming up to Henry Golding after Crazy Rich Asians and Last Christmas. And also, there is a factor about this character character that I really just categorically didn't like. There was a part in the film which kind of took me out of it for a little bit because I was having a grand old time. But then Henry Golding's character does something that to me is just unforgivable, and I thought really undercut the kind of playfulness of the film, and it just seemed very unnecessary to me. If you see, you'll know what I'm talking about. That was kind of something that left a sour taste in my mouth. And then secondly, closely related to this, Michelle Dockery plays Matthew McConaughey's character's wife, and she's really good in this film. I actually really enjoyed her, surprisingly so, because like I said, Guy Ritchie excels in depicting male characters, not so much female characters, which I don't hold against him too often. In this case, for the most part, I thought the portrayal of this female character was done well. I think it was mostly Michelle Dockery doing a lot of the heavy lifting because she didn't have much to work off of, but her performance was really good. Having said that, there is a moment in the film that undermines all of this, and I was really, really disappointed by, because I didn't think it was necessary to go in that direction. I thought if they wanted to... this is a kind of a tiny spoiler, but I thought if they wanted to make this character feel like she's in real danger, it wasn't necessary to do what they chose to do with her. They could have just done something else, another act of violence, but instead they go down a specific direction that I was not okay with, and I think undermined the power of this character. Even though she doesn't have, again, much to do in this film, it was very much felt throughout the film within her dynamic with Matthew McConaughey. But overall, like I said, I very much enjoyed this. This is such a good time at the cinema. It's hilarious, it's energetic, the performances here are fantastic. You have Hugh Grant largely playing against type, and you just have this very funny script and this very interesting way of telling a pretty basic gangster story, and it's all wrapped up within this really cool, really modern and relatable, especially for me, British setting that doesn't feel antiquated and out of touch. And as a result, I'm going to give Guy Ritchie's The Gentleman an 8.5 out of 10. I can't wait to see this film again. I'm definitely going to check it out in the cinema once more because I really did have a fun time with this one, and I wouldn't be surprised if it ended up being one of my favourites of the year, despite the fact that it's the very first film that I have seen in 2020. So now that I told you guys what my thoughts were on this film, it's time for you guys to let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really, really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!